Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. It's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so we're talking another retailer under pressure today is Kohl's, only down about 10% so far this year. Now, we've seen a bunch of earnings now where they're talking about costs. We're seeing the sell-off in Target. Macy's is down, some of their other competitors. What kind of data are you guys seeing? Because yesterday you guys were relatively neutral on Target, but not really taking a position, right? I like what Landon said about that due to the fact that there were a lot of headwinds for this company as far as costs rising. Are you guys seeing positive sentiment on Kohl's going into their earnings?
Yeah, so, yesterday whenever we were breaking down Target, I believe their earnings score shook out to about an 8 in our universe. So we saw a healthy consumer, but we didn't really know how these, rising costs would impact Target, which as we've seen today, this was a huge drain, right? And with Kohl's, though, it's interesting. It's a little bit of a different beast because Kohl's operates slightly more in this type of a discount retail space versus a Target or a Walmart. Whenever we look at Kohl's, too, we do see significant momentum from the consumer. We see mentions of people who are shopping at Kohl's up by about 20% year over year. And alongside this increase, we do see an improvement in overall happiness levels. So you can see on this chart, this is consumer sentiment. So whenever we think about sentiment, this is probably our longest term whenever you're talking about, future growth indicator. So whenever we see this increasing by about 4 points year over year, this is positive. I think this shows continued improvement for Kohl's. And that all shakes out to say, whenever we look at Kohl's, our data is leaning a little bit more bullish versus Target, or I should say a lot a bit more bullish. Our earnings score right now is shaking out to be about a 62. But I will note that a lot of this, whenever we are measuring these things, we're listening to mentions to people who are talking about shopping specifically at Kohl's and shopping with these stores. What we don't necessarily know or can't calculate specifically is how much discounting is happening. So, we tried to look at these from a mentions perspective. And I will say that while more people are talking about shopping at Kohl's and this demand is actually accelerating, we do see signs of a little bit of increased discounting activity. So last quarter, they were rewarded because they didn't pass along as many discounts to consumers. And we had those mentions down by about 40% year over year. But now we're starting to see those pick up again. Potentially, those are up by about 13% now year over year. So that's a huge shift, at least in our data, in terms of consumers talking about, seeking these discounts or receiving a discount at Kohl's. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of a mixed bag there we are seeing really strong demand in Kohl's. We're seeing improvements in happiness, but we are starting to see some signs of increased discounting activity.
Megan, Monday we traded Walmart. And Tuesday we traded Target, and now we're trading Kohl's. There's a little bit of a thank you, sir, may I have another going on here, trying to handle these retailers. So I'm a little hesitant to get back in that pond. But here's the question. Because the one thing that caught our eye this morning was the price action of TJX after their earnings, right? So here's the question, and this might be the difference between what's going on here, is do we put Kohl's in the same basket as Target and Walmart, or do we put it in the same basket as TJX because they do sell clothes and apparel? They're a little bit different. They don't sell groceries, they sell clothes and apparel. So Megan, where do we place them? And I think it might be important where we place them, Megan.
That is the $1 million question of the day, right? Is Kohl's going to fall in this Target camp, or is Kohl's going to fall in this TJ Maxx camp? At least from the minds of consumers, we do see consumers kind of viewing Kohl's as more of this discount retailer, which would kind of, tempt me to place Kohl's at least a little bit more in line with TJ Maxx in that sense. We do have a lot of mentions from consumers who are talking about seeking deals. So people talking just across the board about looking for items that are discounted, or, that those deal discovery mentions are up by about 47% year over year. So I think that there is this shift in mindset of trying to, shake out these deals that potentially TJ Maxx and Kohl's may have. But how this weighs on Kohl's margin, that's a little bit tougher to sort out, to say, previously they were rewarded because they were, diminishing these efforts. And now we're starting to see a shift. So will that ding them? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think, the costs are going to be, I think, in the spotlight here for this company moving forward. Transportation cost, what their inventory levels are, how are they managing that? But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Megan, was about the addition of Sephora. They opened 400 of those within Kohl's stores. Now, they had to outlay a lot of capital for that, so that'll run into that cost argument. But at the same time, typically we see brands like Sephora and Ulta that are relatively recession-proof, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, do you see any impact to the Sephora line getting into more stores, having a positive reflection on Kohl's?
That is, I think, one of the brightest spots in our data is Kohl's partnership with Sephora with these in-store pop-ups. And I think that is something that surprised all of us, but we're certainly seeing traction with consumers. Those mentions on a month-over-month basis are about 27% higher. It's difficult to compare year-over-year stats with this because they simply weren't around a year ago. But now we're starting to see this continued traction. And I think an important note with this Kohl's and Sephora partnership is that this is bringing new shoppers to Kohl's. So about 25% of those Sephora shoppers inside of Kohl's stores are new to the Kohl's environment. So this is a positive thing that Kohl's did, that it's expanding its web of people that it's attracting, and it's expanding its target audience and introducing them to its store's experience. And overall, this is one of the things that's also contributing to its higher sentiment levels. So I think that this is definitely a positive move for Kohl's, and this could be a positive point that they could hit on. And just from a macro perspective, we do see now, as people are being more social, as they're going out and doing more things, we're seeing an increased demand for makeup and beauty supplies and things of that nature. So that could also be a positive tailwind that the company could note on in this report.
Yeah, that's why they always harken that back to the fact that, it's recession-proof, a lot of these names. But, Megan, do you guys have any of that data that you guys had to parse through for Kohl's based on the activist investors getting involved? There's rumors and speculations swirling that Brookfield Management or Simon Property Group might try to come in and buy them. Is that getting into any of your consumer sentiment data that you guys track?
That's a really good question. And so whenever we are listening to Kohl's, at least, all of the data that we include in our charts and that we're analyzing, we're listening to just those consumer mentions. So we isolate just the mentions from people who are actually talking about Kohl's, the store, and their shopping experience and their ordering experience and things of that nature. We do isolate those hashtag mentions, so mentions from investors or mentions, talking about the ticker symbol or, the potential takeover attempts like you mentioned, but we don't include that into the analysis of our data, into the analysis. We're really trying to highlight just the health of the consumer. So I think that, we do see increased mentions in the Kohl's cash tag on the investor side of things, but we are not including that in our analysis of, how is Kohl's doing in the eyes of consumers and sales and foot traffic and things like that.
So you guys are positive, over 60 on your sentiment data for the Kohl's going into this report, right?
Yeah, we're pretty positive. An earnings score of 62 is pretty significant. But I will note that, one thing that's not included in that are the potential costs and the potential discounting impact. But overall, we do see Kohl's actually gaining momentum even into the current quarter. So that demand is continuing to rise even, forward looking. So that could potentially also be a nice nod to guidance.
Yeah, it might be execution also, because it seems like Target and Walmart executives this quarter, at least, a little mismanagement and execution fails across the board. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.